I sold a condo, and this particular developer instructed us not to use, a closing attorney. That they were going to have their own in-house attorney handle the buy side and the sell side. And we went ahead and we're like, no, we're getting another closing attorney anyway. But I'm just curious, what issues can arise? Is it a red flag if they're trying to get you to use because at the end of the day, that closing attorney is representing the developer and they have their interest. Is there any red flags about doing that? Should you always have two closing attorneys on something like that? What would you recommend?
I mean, it's obviously a trust factor. It's not necessarily a red flag, because if you have track record with a particular seller developer, you know that they only want their money, and they want their money secure. That's really the main concern of any seller throughout the process. The problem is when they overreach that position and say, okay, you should not use an outside counsel, or you should use this one, which I've had it both ways, where I've had developers recommend a certain person, which is a little bit of a middle ground from what you just mentioned, where don't use one, we'll use the one we have in-house. And it does streamline the process a bit, because obviously they know what information they need to gather. But the problem with that is that degree of independence that any buyer should have from the seller. So who is going to respond to the buyer? The buyer is really the most important person or entity in that process, and they should be able to have independent counsel, because if there is a lien, if there is an encumbrance, they shouldn't be marketing that property. And there are certain things that a broker needs to do, as I've said it in our talks. The broker is like the first line of defense. The broker obviously says, okay, we're going to market and promote properties that are listed, and in order for that to be listed, we need to at least have some common documents in place to just see if the developer is legit, if the plans are there. But when you have a structure where the developer says, okay, don't use one, that would in my book have the need for independent counsel, just to say, look, I want my counsel to take a look at things, and it's a standard due diligence of 30 days, 30 to 45 days, depending on the nature of the transaction. The property registry now has taken more than 2 weeks, which used to be the norm, to 3 weeks, even a month, to get a certificate of no liens. And that we've had this discussion also in another time. That certificate of no liens provides you with two things, maybe three things, which are very important. One, who is the owner of record, and then you can tie that name, which appears in the certificate, to the documentation for the escritura, the deeds, to say, okay, this person, you're dealing with the person that appears, or you're not, right? And two, confirms if there are any limitations of what we call domain, liens, encumbrances, security interests. And three, if you are at that point in time in the process, you have the purchase preventive notice, which is good for 30 days. That is issued by the property registry when the notary public says, okay, freeze this registry for 30 days so we can get our closing done in a secure fashion. That way, during the 30 days, nothing comes in and everything is secure. And you don't have anything coming in from left field as far as that. So yeah, definitely you do need to have an independent set of eyes. At the end of the day, who is going to be responsible? Well, the closing attorney, if it is paid by the developer, well, obviously they will have their interests at heart, not necessarily that of the buyer. When I was in-house counselor for a large development here in Los Cabos, given the trust factor that was involved with this development, with the principals, and I was there, I was paid by the seller. Many occasions they didn't come with counsel, but at least I was very open in that process and said, look, this is what you need to do, and so they were just comfortable with that. However, that's the exception, and I believe it just makes good sense to have just independent counsel to review that and not take the word of a seller for that. And then that other part which I mentioned is also plugging in certain attorneys or certain trustees, because if the buyer is going to pay the trustee fees, if the buyer is going to pay counsel fees, and also a notary public, which is we will go into that later on regarding closing costs, but if the party that's paying for it is actually saying, well, I need to appoint it myself, and the seller pushes back, that is also a bit of a red flag. Why should the seller be responsible or trying to get a responsible party saying, okay, you need to do this with this trustee, with this notary, and with this attorney? Like, no, no, and no. If you're going to pay for it, then we have a separate conversation. Obviously, they don't want to pay for it. They just want to control the process even more so. And that's a bit of a problem. And that's sometimes they can get away with it because they have a good product, because they have a good marketing staff, and because just the hot market kind of steers them towards this process. But it really makes sense to have just a degree of separation between those parties and their functions.
And one of the most important things that you said there for me was the broker, because at the end of the day, I can just see some projects and who they're listed with, and then look at the price point and just say like, hey, I can already tell that this one is going to be more of a process than something else, because they're just hungry for business and they're trying to get as much as they can, as opposed to going with quality people. And at the end of the day, it's the correct path to take, to buy from a proven developer that has that, because buying into one of those projects is a very painful experience for pretty much all parties involved.
And even with a known quantity, we've had experiences with larger developers that moved thousands of units, and then all of a sudden things went south. And then you have inventory where you have difficulty obtaining title because they basically skip town. And I've seen that as well. And that comes back to the issue of the trust factor. And even with the normal safeguards in place, things happen. Well, imagine if you're just basically going on the word of the sellers, like, okay, we're good, here is the unit, here are the buildings, you can see that this is real, you don't have to wait for it. And I get it, that's part of the acquisition process. If they're doing a pre-sale, it's because they need the funds to get those things off the ground. But it just makes sense to have that separation, and then we can discuss further how you want to structure that purchase price, which is another topic, perhaps later on today or for another time. But yeah.